Spider-Man Brand New Day is the newest entry in the Tom Holland-led Spider-Man franchise. This time round, Peter Parker is at his most isolated, as he has to come to terms with two new threats to his day-to-day life: a mysterious telepathic individual, and arachnid hormonal changes. I think this movie does something which the most effective of these cape stories have to do in order to land. Everything revolves around the central theme. For this movie, said theme is the suppression of self as a result of self-isolation and the contemporary male loneliness epidemic. By centering almost every inclusion into this story around this theme, much of the narrative remains cohesively bound to Peter Parker's interior conflict. And that's where the story excels. These superhero movies as of late haven't had a human element, which makes these larger-than-life characters seem even more unrelatable. This take on Spider-Man grounds his conflict in something which is more personable. The bringing in of characters like the Punisher and the Hulk, both of whom are also figures burdened with trauma and depersonalization in ways Peter is headed towards, is able to use the broader world of the MCU in a way in which it is able to deliver on its thematic spine. The depression of self-suppression and isolation from the world is excellently interwoven given the type of movie that this is. I'm not a big superhero guy anymore, but I thought that this worked because of the character element. Hell, I preferred the movie when it was primarily focused on Peter's own life, with the gradual increase of spider hormones acting as telegraphing for him to deal with his own priorities. For the most part, I'd argue that the mysterious telepathic antagonist and their role within the story's themes was interesting. The weaponization of New York's civilian population as a symbol for the very world turning on Peter is an intriguing added element into the narrative. It really cemented my sentiment for liking what this movie does with the character drama of Peter Parker, exaggerating his isolation. The omnipresence of the mystery antagonist is effective at building suspense and breaking Spider-Man's perception of himself along the way. Building off of the use of the New Yorkers as an antagonistic force, the movie also makes them more of an active participant within the world of the story. It's been said that the MCU has had an issue with portraying everyday people the more the conflicts become bigger in scale, so it's pleasant to see that this movie had an interest in normal people and how they see Spider-Man. There's a reason to care for the normal people that's been lacking in most Marvel movies. New York doesn't quite become a character in its own right, but it comes close. One thing I'm not too keen on is how muddied the film's opening and final act are on a broader narrative level. I like what both do when it comes to the role they serve in building Peter's depression and his arc therein, but they both fall prey to the flaws of interconnected storytelling and the tropes and conventions of this type of modern superhero story. The beginning is stuffed with characters clearly intended for people to recognize who don't really complement the arcs going on in a montage, which is designed to please fans with names and connections to other movies within this ongoing story. There's one example, which I especially think was pretty egregious, as the MCU-ness creeped its way into the story, which otherwise would be a very solid solo venture for the webhead. The climax, the actual character dynamics notwithstanding, without spoiling too much, does get too big with its scope, affecting a large population and not being discussed afterward. It gets far out of the bounds of being street level into something not quite city destroying, but close enough to that type of a climax. I don't think it needed to be wholly like the other superhero movies. The story is one where it's effective without having to superficially build stakes on such a scale. The actual relationship between Spider-Man and Punisher is the surprising soul of this movie. I didn't expect to like the inclusion of Frank Castle as much as I ended up doing, but their complementing arcs and personalities give the movie a buddy dynamic where both characters have the capacity to grow because of how they interact. Their worldviews, both fundamentally similar to an extent when it comes to their isolation, differ because of their reasons for adopting said worldviews. The difference in tone, Spider-Man being quippy and youthful compared to the Punisher's almost overly gruff tone, within the confines of a PG-13 Spider-Man movie, creates a comedic back and forth which is effective at being funny while also, as I mentioned earlier, complementing the themes of isolation. This is also probably the best performance I've seen from Tom Holland in general, not only as Spider-Man. Here's Peter Parker, the ball of depression that he is, his confusion at everything going on in his life, losing everything he once had, is brought to the screen in an amount of detail not seen before from Holland. For me, there are still a number of Holland roles I've never seen before. The use of comedy as a shield is translucent, the audience visibly seeing Peter's inner turmoil and hurt, which he desperately tries to cover up with work. And then comes how this movie actually looks. There's a colour grade here by colorist Tom Poole, which actually feels motivated. The darker, more mature story is presented in a darker looking movie, with actual dark tones in the nocturnal sequences. It still looks moderately washed out during the scenes taking place in the day. On top of this, the fight sequences, specifically the martial arts, hand-to-hand combat sequences which are choreographed by Jackie Chan's stunt team, are some of the best action scenes to come out of this series. There's one in particular where a mass of human bodies are used together in a number of fluid motions, which is incredibly cool. The practical web slinging gives Spider-Man an amount of gravity, his dexterous flailing making this now mundane quality of the character more tangible and interesting this time around, even with how often it's been brought to film. Considering I can't really discuss the plot, more so the actual antagonist, in this section, I wanted to be clear that I found myself liking the actual Peter Parker stuff in this movie, but the broader machinations of the story where I started checking out. Great thematic cohesion, but some of the story elements kind of let it down. So, all in all, this is a pretty good summer blockbuster, mixing action with solid heart. Spider-Man Brand New Day, 3.5 stars. And now it's time for spoilers. This isn't a substitute for watching the film, so I suggest watching it first, before continuing. Before I get to the elephant in the room, I want to start with how much I really did enjoy the end credits for this movie. Not the post-credits scene, just the end credits, right before the white text on black background. This is the final note that director Destin Daniel Cretton uses to make this a contender for the title of being the Spider-Man movie. The montage of everyday New Yorkers living life in the city, the title card being framed around the skyline, all go in to imbue this movie with the crucial quality that is place. It's a simple detail that does numbers for my final interpretation of the movie, especially when following the coming together of New York to help Spider-Man after the third act, and the celebration of the people that it is. The end credit sequence is beautiful. And now to get to Sadie Sink's mysterious role. It's Jean Grey. Like all the leaks have been saying so, she's playing Jean Grey. Initially, most prevalently when the character's name is revealed via a close-up on a computer screen, a jaded, cynical part of myself saw this inclusion as being a ham-fisted attempt at ushering in something new to be excited for in the future of this gargantuan movie series. It originally feels like this particular character is heralding the X-Men. Like I mentioned earlier, the actual abilities possessed by Jean Grey are an effective conflict with Peter's status quo of self-isolation, but there doesn't seem to exactly be a specific angle on Jean when she's delegated to being a big mystery, and that concealing of her identity takes up half the narrative. However, a significant chunk of Act 3 goes a long way in more concisely bringing her into the thematic landscape. She, like Peter and Bruce, is someone who's completely alone due to her genetic differences. Like Frank, she's been led to dangerous resorts because she's at the end of her rope. Although there is still the lingering idea that maybe she's only been put in a Spider-Man movie for other means, by the end of the film, she serves as an actual foil for Peter. Exactly like Hulk and the Punisher, a character who could otherwise be merely a jangling of keys is tooled to be a foil. Pete has to grow as a character to mentor this young individual who's in a similar place to himself at the beginning of the film. The actual story ends with Frank, who represents a natural, darker endpoint which Peter's arc could go down, shooting Jean, and Peter himself having to intervene. The culmination of these three specific characters in a non-fight sequence makes this movie work as a whole. Plus, Sink is able to bring a sympathizable quality to Jean, bringing her pain to life. Her lashing out at the world is grounded in an emotional hurt, similar to Peter's own, which contextualizes the enigmatic antagonism of the first half of the runtime. To contrast with the enjoyable placement of external characters into Spider-Man's orbit, I didn't enjoy the recurring, albeit still smallish, presence of Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova, because her scenes actively reminded me of the ongoing nature of this series, imbuing this movie with an MCU-ness which was mostly smoothed over in the rest of the story. Don't get me wrong, she's probably my favourite character in the MCU right now, but the dialogue she's given is a whole lot of clunky exposition, reminding audiences of what has happened previously in the franchise, and lightly sprinkling setups for more adventures in the future. It's not a big deal per se, but the fact that she appears early on, and once more later on, irked me a tad. But, most importantly, this movie, I thought, was interesting because of how it doesn't play into certain ideologies surrounding romance. That doesn't quite sound right, but I'm finding it difficult to find the exact wording that I'm looking for. The movie doesn't backtrack on the ending of No Way Home. MJ has still forgotten who Peter Parker is, and it doesn't gloss over that fact. Peter can't just win her back superficially by simply re-entering her life. As far as the romantic angle goes, it demonstrates a more mature approach to the portrayal of one's social circles. What I think makes this even more powerful is the emphasis placed on needing genuine friends and that kind of human connection. Be it Spider-Man building Legos with Ned, talking to MJ and Ned without expectations of anything necessarily more from the latter, and the final scene being the rekindling of Peter's friendship with Ned, the return of the handshake from the previous movies being symbolic of the deeper, ingrained nature of genuine relationships which are a fundamental part of people. I thought that the exploration of people's need for friends, particularly within a contemporary culture where people find themselves alone, to be more thematically intriguing than what I assumed would be going on beforehand. I'll admit, I thought that Peter and MJ would be getting back together in this, but I'm glad that that didn't end up happening. It's more interesting this way. But, to be fair, I didn't have any hopes of this movie in general, so I'm glad to be proven wrong. Well, that's all. Keep on watching movies, and form your own opinions. See you in the next one.